HOA Karen celebrated her wedding on my property while I was on a work trip. The moment I pulled into my driveway after 2 weeks away, the sight that greeted me was so surreal that for a moment I thought I had taken a wrong turn. My once empty, well-maintained plot of land, a private retreat where I planned to build a guest house, had been transformed into a full-blown wedding venue, complete with elegant white tents, decorative floral arches, and rows of folding chairs filled with well-dressed guests. The sound of cheerful chatter and classical music played by a live string quartet drifted through the air, as if I had just stumbled into the middle of a wedding scene from a romantic movie. But this was not a movie, this was my private property, and I had never given anyone permission to use it, let alone host a lavish ceremony. The absurdity of the situation made my head spin as I slowly stepped out of my car, eyes scanning the spectacle in disbelief. I spotted caterers bustling around, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres and expensive champagne, a DJ booth blasting celebratory music, and a massive wedding cake set up under a tent. My irritation turned to fury as I realized someone had trespassed on my land and turned it into their personal event space. I wasn't even gone a full month, and already someone had claimed ownership of my property like it was a public park. As I stormed toward the crowd, a security guard, a hired one no less, stepped forward and blocked my path. "Excuse me, sir," he said, giving me an up-and-down look as if I was some uninvited stranger. "This is a private event." My mouth nearly fell open at the audacity of his statement. "Private event on my land. This is my property," I shot back, my voice carrying an edge of disbelief and anger. The guard's face scrunched in confusion, but before he could say anything else, a shrill voice pierced through the air like nails on a chalkboard. "What is going on here?" The crowd parted, and there she was, the neighborhood's most infamous busybody, Karen, striding toward us in an expensive white gown, dripping in lace and pearls. My stomach dropped as I put the pieces together. Karen, the HOA tyrant who had spent the past year trying to control everything in the neighborhood, despite having no actual authority, was standing in front of me in a wedding dress, her face twisted into annoyance rather than guilt. She looked at me as if I was the problem here, as if I had crashed her wedding instead of the other way around. "Oh, it's you," she said dismissively, rolling her eyes. "What are you doing here?" My jaw clenched so tightly I thought my teeth might crack. "I should be asking you that. This is my land. Why the hell is there a wedding happening here?" Karen had the audacity to scoff, flipping her veil over her shoulder as if my question was beneath her. "Oh, please," she said, exasperated. "It's just a patch of empty land, you weren't even using it." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the sheer entitlement oozing from her words. "That patch of empty land belongs to me, and you had no right to set up an entire event here." I snapped, my voice rising. Some of the guests, clearly oblivious to the situation, turned to stare, whispering among themselves. But Karen wasn't done yet. "Look," she said, her tone patronizing, "this is a community neighborhood, and we all have a responsibility to make it look nice. Your land was just sitting there being an eyesore. I figured it was only fair that we use it for something beautiful instead of letting it go to waste." My hands curled into fists at my sides. "You trespassed through a wedding on my property, and now you're acting like you did me a favor." I could feel my blood pressure rising as I scanned the area again, my gaze landing on luxury decorations, crystal centerpieces, and velvet-covered chairs that must have cost a fortune. "Who even gave you permission to do this?" Karen crossed her arms, raising her chin defiantly. "I don't need permission. The HOA has certain privileges. You are not the HOA president." I exploded, cutting her off. "Hell, there's not even an active HOA in this neighborhood. You've been parading around like you're in charge, but in reality you have zero authority over my land." Karen's face turned red, but before she could argue back, a wedding planner appeared, clipboard in hand, looking between us with concern. "Mrs. Karen, is everything okay?" she asked, glancing at me warily. "This man says he's just confused." Karen cut her off with a forced laugh. "Go handle the cake, I'll take care of this." Then she turned to me with a venomous glare, lowering her voice. "You're ruining my wedding," she hissed. I laughed bitterly, crossing my arms. "Oh, don't worry, Karen," I said coldly. "I'm just getting started." Karen stood there in her designer gown, her face contorted with a mixture of annoyance and frustration, but I was done playing nice. I pulled out my phone, snapping photos of the wedding setup, the tents, the guests, and most importantly, Karen herself standing there with that fake, innocent expression. "What are you doing?" she demanded, stepping closer, but I held up a hand. "Gathering evidence," I said through gritted teeth. "Because when I call the police, I want them to see exactly how far you went in illegally using my land." At the mention of the police, Karen's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly regained her fake composure. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "You're making a scene over nothing, it's just one night." She waved a dismissive hand as if breaking the law was just some minor inconvenience. Besides, she continued with a smirk, you should be thanking me. I turned this ugly piece of land into something elegant. It's an improvement, really. My vision flashed red. An improvement, I echoed, my voice deadly calm. You think stealing my land, trespassing and profiting off my property is an improvement? Karen rolled her eyes dramatically, but I wasn't finished. Who paid for all of this? I asked, my voice sharp. Karen hesitated. The guests, of course, she said, flipping her hair. People were happy to contribute to such a grand event. And why shouldn't they? Weddings aren't cheap. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice low with anger. You sold tickets to a wedding that isn't even on your property? A slow smirk crept across her lips. It's called fundraising, she said sweetly. Not that you'd understand since you don't contribute anything to this community. I nearly laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of it. Fundraising for what? I asked, crossing my arms. Karen hesitated again, her eyes darting around before she finally huffed. For me, obviously. Do you have any idea how much weddings cost? My stomach turned. She charged people money to attend a wedding on my land, my private land, all while pretending she was doing something charitable. How much did you make? I asked coldly. Her smirk widened. Enough, she said smugly, looking me up and down like I was beneath her. More than enough to cover expenses. People were happy to pay for an exclusive event. My blood boiled. She had profited off my land, invited over 100 strangers and acted like I was the problem. And worst of all, she had lied to vendors, forged documents, and illegally used my address to book caterers, decorators, and security. I turned to one of the caterers passing by, a man dressed in a crisp white shirt and black apron. Excuse me, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Who hired you? The caterer blinked at me confused. Mrs. Karen, he said. She provided paperwork showing she had ownership of the land. She signed the contracts. I turned back to Karen, my fists clenched. You forged documents? She waved a dismissive hand. It's not that big of a deal, she said. I needed vendors to believe the land was available. I took a step closer, my voice dropping. So let me get this straight. You lied, trespassed, charged people for access to my land, faked ownership and signed fraudulent contracts. And you're standing here acting like you're the victim? Karen scoffed, tilting her head. Oh, get over it. No one got hurt. What's the worst that could happen? You're just being petty. The rage that boiled inside me was uncontrollable. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Oh, Karen, I said, my voice calm but deadly. You have no idea what you've just done. Karen's smug expression was the final straw. This woman had spent months parading around the neighborhood, acting as if she owned everything, but this time she had gone too far. She had forged legal documents, trespassed, profited off my land, and had the audacity to tell me to get over it, as if her crimes were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But I wasn't about to let her walk away from this unscathed. Being my composure, I turned away from her and began dialing 911. What are you doing? Karen demanded, stepping forward in alarm. Calling the police, I said coolly, holding the phone to my ear. You committed fraud, trespassing and theft, and you're going to pay for it. Karen's face drained of color for a moment before she scoffed, flipping her veil dramatically. Oh, please, she said, forcing a laugh. You're overreacting. What are they going to do? Arrest me for throwing a wedding? She glanced around at the guests, who had gone quiet, watching the intense confrontation unfold. Some of them looked nervous, others curious, but no one was on her side anymore. Even the caterers and event staff were starting to back away. The operator answered, and I calmly explained the situation: trespassing, forgery, unauthorized use of private property, and fraudulent contracts signed under false name. That last part got the operator's attention. We are sending officers now, she confirmed. I ended the call and turned to Karen, who was still trying to act unbothered, though I could see her hands clenching into fists. You're making a fool of yourself, she hissed under her breath. The police won't do anything, it's just a little misunderstanding. You're about to find out, I said with a smirk. It took less than 15 minutes before I heard the sound of sirens approaching. 2 squad cars pulled up to the front of my property, and several officers stepped out, their hands resting on their belts as they scanned the scene. The second they saw the lavish wedding setup, their expressions shifted from neutral professionalism to disbelief. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a firm stance, approached me first. Are you the property owner? He asked. I nodded. Yes, and I didn't authorize any of this, I said, gesturing around me. This woman, I pointed at Karen, trespassed, forged documents, and illegally charged people money to attend an event on my land. The officer's face hardened as he turned to Karen, who immediately switched tactics. Officer, I think we're all getting a little carried away here, she said sweetly, flashing a fake innocent smile. This is just a small wedding misunderstanding. Did you sign legal documents under false ownership? The officer cut her off, his tone cold. Karen flinched, but before she could answer, the caterers, decorators, and vendors all started speaking up. One of the caterers stepped forward, holding a contract in his hands. "She showed us proof of ownership," he said. "She signed everything under her name. We had no idea she didn't own the land." Another vendor, one of the event planners, held up a receipt. "She charged guests money to attend," she added. "She told us it was a private estate venue. She even set up VIP seating for extra fees." At this, Karen's fake confidence crumbled. Her face paled, and for the first time I saw real panic set in. "Wait, hold on," she stammered, glancing between the officers and me. We can work something out. I was just trying to create something beautiful for the community." But the officer wasn't buying it. "Ma'am, forging legal documents and profiting off someone else's land is a serious crime," he said sternly. "We'll need you to come with us." Karen's smug facade shattered instantly. "Wait, no, you don't understand," she cried, stepping back. "This isn't fair. It was just a harmless mistake." She looked around desperately, but no one, not even her wedding guests, came to her defense. In fact, several of them looked disgusted that she had lied to them and scammed them out of money. As the officers placed her in handcuffs, she twisted her head toward me with a look of pure hatred. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I just smirked. "No, Karen," I said coolly, "you'll regret this." The aftermath was glorious. Not only was Karen arrested, but she was charged with trespassing, fraud, and falsifying documents. She had to pay massive fines, compensate every guest and vendor, and worst of all for her, she became the talk of the town. The local news picked up the story, broadcasting how a self-entitled woman scammed an entire neighborhood into believing she owned property she didn't have any rights to. Her social standing was destroyed, and her husband-to-be. Yeah, he left her. Turns out he wasn't aware of the scam, and when he found out how insane and manipulative she was, he cancelled the wedding entirely. The cherry on top, I decided to take extra precautions to ensure something like this never happened again. I installed high-security fences, surveillance cameras, and no trespassing signs everywhere. Karen, she tried to come back into the neighborhood after her legal troubles, but she was met with absolute rejection. No one wanted anything to do with her anymore. She was officially blacklisted from every event, meeting, and community gathering. Her reign as the self-appointed HOA queen was finally over, and as I sat back on my newly secured land, sipping a cold drink, I couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served.